2022. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move the introduction of a resolution of a housing bill presented in the order paper as the resolution speaking to Crown Lands Divesting and Disposal Act, Cap 225, and this speaks to
Order number two.
In the name of the Honorable Leader of the House, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of the parcel of land situated at Worthing in the parish of Christchurch in the Senate.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, this is a matter that was approved by the Cabinet of Barbados under the last term of this administration. With the calling of a general election in January of 2022, the matter, however, did not find its way through Parliament, and on that basis, it went to Cabinet for ratification, and it is now being presented in Parliament. Mr. President, it speaks to an area of 18,909.5 square meters of land situated at Worthing, Christchurch, and the vesting of this land in the National Housing Corporation. Mr. President, you would recall, if you followed the debate in the other place when it was presented by the Senior Minister with responsibility for infrastructure, that this is a long-standing matter that specifically would focus on the persons who are tenanted in this land and who have been there for a long time. There are a number of residents who live in this area, Worthing in Christchurch, Mr. President, who need to be able to benefit from the security of tenure that this leasing would allow for them to have access to. It would also allow for us to terminate, under the new arrangement, Mr. President, unauthorized and non-compliant users who are working on the land. In addition, Mr. President, to making plots of land available potentially to new tenants. The Minister with responsibility for housing is of the view that this is an important initiative and that there also has to be a rationalization of the open market rates associated with the tenanting of this land situated at Worthing, and it is on this basis, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. Speakers on the matter? Okay, the question is that this resolution... Sorry, Senator Thompson. Her Honor, Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just really want to make a few brief remarks on this matter and on tangential matters relative to compulsory acquisitions by the Crown. I was particularly mollified when I heard the leader of government business indicate that the rentals accruing from this acquisition would be at commercial rates. I remember in a previous Barbados Labour Party administration, when I carried the portfolio of housing, that I discovered that large tracts of land at Worthing in Christchurch, a lot of it prime commercial land on the beachfront, is actually being rented to people who are carrying on commercial activities, but government has never sought to put in place a commercial value for the rents that otherwise would attract substantial rental income and revenues for the taxpayers and for the people of Barbados. Insofar as we are seeking to regularize that kind of situation, then I would wish to laud the government, because while I imagine that some of the persons impacted by the properties and the changes of status in that area will complain that the increases in rent might be high, the reality is that they have never paid a commercial rate. And it speaks really to the whole issue of the extent to which government puts premium value on its property, how it uses physical and infrastructural space for the benefit of the population, and the extent to which private sector developers using the same space are able to maximize the benefits for the wider public when government appears not to be in a position to do so. So while I don't know the specifics or all the specifics relating to this particular parcel and this particular measure before the chamber, I would wish as for general information, and certainly out of general concern, because I know the history of these rentals, to see these kinds of non-commercial rentals, non-commercial for government regularized. And I think that there has to be some measure of balance between how government uses this land, to whom it gives access, at what rate and for what purpose, and the extent to which development purposes are used for taxpayers' lands. But the taxpayers must also and are entitled to derive proper value from it. And we should not be allowing people to have commercial properties and high-end, high-value, high-income earning commercial properties on lands that belong to the taxpayers without government in return having what is a commercial rent. As I indicated, I'm just aware of the status of the land in the general area, and I speak out of a previous encounter, previous experience, when I know that an attempt to raise the rental brought a lot of squealing and pleas for could there pour me. But could there pour me had high value commercial property on the taxpayers' lands, but didn't think that high value rents should be paid. And in balancing the development concerns, and Senator earlier today, in another Senator Nurse, in an earlier bill, speaking under the appropriations, was making the point of the balancing of land use considerations. And truly, in a small developing country where there is a limited land mass, even if we construct the islands that are anticipated in the future, the reality is that you're always going to have to make some decision between balancing how you use your land space. How much of it is applied to housing? How much of it is applied to commercial space? To what extent should you reserve lands for agriculture? Now, under the previous physical development plan, there used to be by the Ministry of Agriculture an imperative that 30,000 acres, no, I'm sorry, I think I have the figure wrong. I'm going to pull it, the senator spoke today to the amount of lands that were being applied or sought for retention in agricultural use. And I think that the point that he was making was valid, but I have to ask whether in the context of Barbados, when you look at all of the other competing uses for land, what is the base and the extent to which studies and serious analyses are used in determining how lands owned by the taxpayers, how part of the national patrimony is utilized, who benefits and how, in relation to the use of lands for agriculture. 30,000 acres, sir. It used to be 30,000 acres. Now, Barbados' total acreage is 105,000 acres. Previously, as I indicated, there used to be a mandate from the Ministry of Agriculture that 30,000 acres should be held for agricultural use. And the reality is that there are lands that are earmarked for agriculture, which in reality are lying fallow. They're not in agricultural production. How we bring them back into production, the methods that we use, it is now a matter for discussion, and it is a matter for discussion in the context of the Ministry of Agriculture today, not decreasing the amount of lands to be put in agriculture, but seeking to put 35,000 acres 35,000 acres into agricultural production. And one has to ask to the extent to which that is a realistic plan, given the fact that technology has changed so considerably, and you can now have very intensive agriculture using modern technologies on much smaller tracts of land. People are growing farms on top of buildings. You have hydroponics and other modern technologies, greenhouses and shade houses that are used in particular ways that allow for high production, high volume production of all kinds of agricultural crops. I think too that you have to consider what is the kind of agricultural product that we want to have. To what extent is this agricultural reserve going to be put into sugar canes? For what purpose? Whether it will be sugar for local use, whether it will be the high-value sugars or the exotic sugars that will sell on the market as organics and boutique shops and boutique supermarkets. The extent to which we are going to grow food for food and nutritional security, what type of food we are going to grow, what is going to be the balance between what we grow locally and what we import from the Caribbean. Because coming out of COVID, certainly one of the discussions of CARICOM heads of government has been the extent to which this region can boost its own agricultural production, bearing in mind that the two highest imports are fuel and food for this region. And as small island developing states far from the centers of production, where we now understand that supply chains can be cut off, whether it is by a virus or by the saber rattling or specter of war, that where we thought our supply chains were assured, and it was really just a matter of whether we could find the foreign exchange to pay for the goods and services that we want, we are now finding out that there are exogenous shocks that we had not anticipated, do not necessarily know how to navigate or address, and for which we now have to start to plan in a way that we hadn't before. So my question would be really, in a modern era where technology is driving agricultural production, where technology is determining what your crop yields and crop volumes are, to what extent are you going to really move from 30,000 acres, which was the previous reserve, to an increased reserve of 35,000 acres when you could not even satisfy your 30,000 acres before? And as I indicated, how that will be apportioned between what types of crops for export, for nutritional security. And if you are talking about for export, really we have to be talking, in my view, sir, about for food and nutritional security. Because given the small land mass, we cannot produce the volumes. We don't have the critical mass. We cannot produce the economies of scale to compete on the international market with other countries, other small states, not necessarily small island, or small island, which are much larger than our own. We cannot compete. And then there are developing countries where their populations and their GDPs are not at the level that ours are at, and therefore they can produce crops. Not only do they have larger land masses, but the cost of labor is so much lower that they can mass produce the kind of crop and develop critical mass and be more competitive in the marketplace than we can be. So there needs to be a very clear analysis of where our competitive advantage lies, what it lies in, and therefore what we pursue as we pursue a land management and land development policy. Housing will continue to be a substantial and significant demand. In fact, the IDB has made the point that in terms of development, if you consider what the avenues of development are, and you look at the development needs of the population, that in the Caribbean, housing is the significant unmet need. the Prime Minister and other members of the government have spoken to the extent of which there is a 25,000 person waiting list on the national housing list of applicants. When I was housing minister, the list was at 17,000. So you can see how it has grown and is growing exponentially. But that is a challenge which exists not only in Barbados, but in every Caribbean country. And therefore, where you have small land masses, competing interests for land use, you're always going to have these tensions between the public demand for housing and what type of housing and what you put into agricultural or other production and use. What you do on your beachfront. Should you have beachfront hotels which rise for several stories into the air and perhaps block the view and block the windows to the sea? So these are debates and conversations that we need to have at the national level. There is another point that I would wish to make. I'm not too sure how long I've been speaking, sir. Give a frustrated politician a microphone and
You've been speaking 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Much obliged to you, sir. So, in the 15 minutes remaining to me, sir, I want to make one more point at least, and it is this. It relates again, perhaps though not within the parameters entirely of this particular resolution before the House, but it certainly does relate to national housing and the matter of national housing in Barbados. For many years, and Barbados is fortunate that we have compulsory acquisition rules where I don't remember the exact section under the Act, allows that once the government gives notice that a parcel of land is needed for a public purpose, government can go in and take possession in order to carry out that public purpose. It is something that we don't realize has allowed a level of rapid development in Barbados and stopped people for nefarious and other reasons from frustrating legitimate government policy. We saw it on the South Coast when we were doing the South Coast Sewerage Project and the boardwalk, where property owners objected to having parts of the equipment, parts of the system on their lands, where and I smile because again, this was policy in which I had been involved. I smile now at how everybody talks about how wonderful the boardwalk is, when in fact, as minister, I fought with landowners to have the boardwalk placed there. People who are now lauding it did not want it and objected strongly, and I had to reply to copious letters, do site visits, send out the officers from the Coastal Zone Management Unit, and it really was a very difficult thing. But I'm making this point to justify the existence in our legislation of a section which gives immediate access to government, or relatively immediate access to government, where land is wanted for a public purpose. I recently did a study on housing in the rest of the Caribbean, and because of the absence of a corollary or equivalent section in pieces of legislation in the region, governments all can suffer tremendous difficulty and setbacks, financial setbacks as well as setbacks in time, because the Honorable Senator made the point earlier in the day that when you have planned a project at a particular time, if there are delays in execution, it isn't only time that you are losing, it is costs that are being added to the project, which can, in the end, stymie its completion altogether. And therefore, many governments throughout the region without similar legislation have a significant problem. And finally, I turn to what would be my concluding point on this matter, sir, and it is that one of the other pieces of legislation which we have is the right to compulsorily acquire, and while it has been well used for national purposes, whether it has to improve, beg your pardon, and expand the Harson Cave, again, another project in which I was involved, or whether it has to do with the compulsory acquisition of lands for the construction or extension of roads, or for whatever purpose, the legislation has served us well. However, in the process, property owners have suffered significant losses and have not been compensated. Because just as the legislation allows for the compulsory acquisition of the lands that are needed, it also mandates that government should pay for the lands that are taken. And that can be the subject of negotiation. Often, sir, people die. A second generation of the family grows up hearing that they used to own a piece of land that the road was now on, and nobody is compensated at all. I do not mean to speak as the frustrated member of Parliament for St. James South, sir. But in the constituency of St. James South, which I used to have the honor to represent, there is still a community at Halls Village that I believe is awaiting its compensation for the road that I was able to lead the construction of, but I would wish to see it completed. And I'm not just making this point out of a former self-interest or so. It really is a wider point that relates to acquisitions all over the country. It is a major problem where government does these acquisitions for good and legitimate purposes. The projects for which the acquisitions are targeted are well executed, and the public is happy generally. But the families, the individual families who have lost their land, sometimes it isn't a large parcel of land, but they have lost property and they are entitled to compensation. And equally, when we are planning these projects, just as we make provision for the compensation, that we must put aside what we know to be the resources, the financial resources to which the property owners will be and are entitled when these projects are put in place. I believe that that is a chord that will find resonance with people all over Barbados, from the south to the north of Barbados and east to west. And I can only urge that as we speak about a new paradigm in the way government does business and in the execution of public policy and the way our civil servants are supposed to work, our public service is supposed to work, and the way government will do what is right as between the citizen and the polity, then I would urge, sir, that really this is an area of much and long-standing complaint and really of some distress, because families who are without substantial financial means could really do with a little berry, and therefore government should give it to them as it is our responsibility to do. Sir, I believe that I have taken my full time, and therefore I will close on that note. I am much obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Thompson. Senator Cummings. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed.
Order number 6, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move the second reading of the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2022.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill before the House is, in principle, a simple matter. The Road Traffic Amendment Act being proposed for amendment, Mr. President, is meant to take into account the new requirements for the development of new forms of identification in Barbados. As the legislation, Mr. President, is now drafted, it requires, and I quote from Section 74 of the relevant Act, Cap 295, it speaks to the provision, or rather the production, of a driving license or identification card under very specific circumstances, Mr. President. And those circumstances include, for example, if you are stopped along the roadways by a police officer or a transportation official and you are required to present a form of identification. Mr. President, I believe that you have heard on more than one occasion the government that we are a part of speak on more than one occasion about the importance of transformation, digital identification, and the imminent introduction of new digital IDs in Barbados. Mr. President, one of the platforms, one of the key planks of this new digital ID is going to be the integration of and inclusion in a single place a number of forms of identification, including the existing cards that we currently hold with regard, in this instance, to identification cards and our driver's licenses. The Minister with responsibility for industry, science and technology, you would have heard during the course of the estimates debate, give a detailed outline of what this entire process is going to look like, and so I will not go into that. And I also know that he will also be making, in the next couple of weeks, on the basis of that which has already been approved by the Cabinet, a number of public statements, and he will be sharing public communication and public education processes on what this new identity card looks like. But, Mr. President, it simply allows for there to be coherence between the existing legislation and the new legislation, specifically the Barbados Identity Management Act, and then the new road traffic legislation. So, for example, Mr. President, if I have my current Barbados driver's license, my current Barbados driver's license, I was going to say something else, Mr. President, because it expired in January of this year after 3 years, and I don't yet have my new driver's license, but I'm not going to throw that shade on this occasion. But the new identity card, Mr. President, would remove the need for me to have a new driver's license, a new identification card with the blue background that we already have, and it would integrate that into a single digital format that can be used to pull our driver's license information. So for those of us, for instance, who renew your driver's licenses for 3 or 5 years at a time, the information can be pulled from the new identity card. And this legislation allows you to have the legislation changed, this amendment, allows the legislation to be changed to reflect the new Identity Management Act that has already been passed, and that will allow for a number of also consequential amendments, Mr. President, and they are set out in column 2 of the schedule. And these, Mr. President, will be some of the transformational initiatives that you will see emerging, certainly in the area of science and technology. As we make transformations, Mr. President, in the way in which we do business, there are going to be amendments associated with the antiquated legislation in some instances that would have predated these kinds of transformational initiatives, and as a result, we will be required to bring those amendments to this place to have them pass through Parliament. And so, Mr. President, I don't want to make this more complicated than it really is, but it simply is, in summary, a means of integrating our new future identification card into our provisions for our legislation on the road traffic regulations governing how we interact with the Royal Barbados Police Force and transportation officials who may from time to time require us to present our identification. I can't read your lips with the mask on. I'm being reminded, Mr. President, that it is the Barbados Police Service, and that is correct. I think most of us are getting used to making these new terms now post our new republic. So, Mr. President, this is the matter for the consideration of the Honourable the Senate, and I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time.
Speakers, the question is that this bill be read a second time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and this Senate dissolves itself into a committee of the whole.
The question is that I do now leave the chair. The Honourable Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. President, I beg to move that clause, Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
Question is that Clause 3 now stand part. All honourable members in favour say aye. Those
Aye.
against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 4 do now stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 The question is that Clause 4 now stand part. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move the reading of the bill a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Road Traffic Act, Cap 295,
Sorry.
as amended.
No, it's amendment. Road traffic.
Mr. President, just for information of senators, the Barbados Police Service appears in this legislation, but you will recall that when we did the constitutional amendment, it was indicated that wherever the police force appeared, that would be changed to the police service. So those amendments will be made by the law revision.
Yes, sir. And the constitutional amendment did have a period of 3 years within which those powers will be exercised by the President and other authorities. So the question is that this bill be now passed and so cited. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now so passed and cited.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of this sitting of the Honorable the Senate until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, March 22nd.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, March 22nd. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Honourable senators against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The sitting is therefore so suspended.